Track 1. "I will introduce you to the four who I told you about earlier, Carol," said Mrs. Chew, with jauntiness in her voice. The pair walked into the warm recreation room and over to 4 elderly men sat in armchairs in front of a shiny, polished black Steinway piano. The men stopped chatting and looked up at the women. "Good morning, this is Carol. She's come for an interview for the nursing sister's position to manage our new nursing home section," said Mrs. Chew. Carol smiled and then furrowed her brow when she smelt an unpleasant aroma lingering around the 4. "Good morning, Carol. I'm Charles, and delighted to meet you," said Charles in his articulate English tone, and he smirked when he saw the blonde-haired woman smiling through a grimace. "Hello, Charles. It's lovely to meet you too," said Carol, thinking Charles reminded her of her grandfather in his smart shirt, tie, and cardigan. Charles smiled and nodded at Carol. "You look too pretty and young to be looking after old farts," said a scrawny-looking wrinkled geriatric who looked only slightly more alive than Keith Richards. "I can't see a wedding ring. Are you married?" he asked, and leered at Carol, who blushed. "That's John," said Mrs. Chew. "It's Boomer, you old bat," snapped John Varley. Mrs. Chew smirked as Boomer glared at her, knowing he hated anyone calling him John. Carol looked at the scruffy old obnoxious man dressed in a tatty old stained AC/DC t-shirt and grimy jeans. She thought Boomer's face looked like an anemic prune, and he had a bald scalp with long greasy grey hair around the back and sides. She smiled, shook her head, and said, "No, Boomer, I'm not married, but I live with my partner in London." "Partner? Does that mean a woman? Are you a lessee?" Carol giggled. "No, Boomer, he's my boyfriend." "Huh, why didn't you just say boyfriend then?" "Hello, Carol, I'm Elvin," said a small elderly man as bald as a bell end in a chirpy Cockney accent. "I'm from the old smoke too. What part of London are you from?" Carol smiled. "Hello, Elvin. I'm not from London, I'm from Chelmsford, but I went to London University and have been living and working in Whitechapel for several years," she said, trying not to stare at Elvin's digitally challenged hands. "Ignore Boomer, Carol. He has an acquired taste," smiled a younger-looking man with Latino looks and jet-black hair. "Hi, I'm Wayne, and originally from Canada, but I've lived in England for many years." "Yeah, because they don't sell Grecian 2000 in Canada," whispered Boomer, and chortled quietly so Wayne wouldn't hear him, even with his new hearing aid, which Wayne hadn't yet figured out how to use properly. "Hi, Wayne," Carol said, and smiled at the 4. "It's lovely to meet you all. Mrs. Chew told me you're all retired musicians. Do you still perform?" Charles smirked. "Oh, no, my dear, but we still practice sometimes, and perform the occasional recital for the other residents, but nothing too strenuous." He nodded towards his piano. "We're too old to be rockers," said Elvin, and smirked. "Speak for yourself, Baldy. You know we still belt out some great tunes," said the brash Boomer, and, being glared at by the other 3, looked chastised and sheepish. "Okay, Carol, now you've met these and most of the residents, let's go to my office and finalize the details." Carol nodded, and the pair walked out of the rec room and over to Mrs. Chew's office on the ground floor of the residence. They walked past several other elderly residents she had met earlier, still sitting on wooden benches in the well-kept grounds of Fosdyke Residential Home, enjoying the sunshine on a beautiful summer's day. Carol inhaled the sweet floral fragrances drifting on the soft summer breeze and removing the stench surrounding the 4 musicians from her nostrils. "Charles, Wayne, Elvin, and Boomer are interesting characters," said Carol, "but there was a strange smell. Does one of them have a bowel problem?" Mrs. Chew shook her head and said, "One of them did, but he passed away several years ago, and the 4 blamed the ripe smell on his ghost. The old guys call it Steve's revenge." She then chuckled.